Should there be criminal investigations into how the state handled unemployment during COVID-19? Because we know there was $5.2 billion in overpayments, which includes tens of millions of dollars that went to those who were incarcerated and millions of dollars who went to those who were dead. Altogether, over $5 billion of tax dollars overspent. And it took a long time to get that number here in the state of Illinois. Well, you have individuals who've seen these audits now who want some kind of criminal investigation, including one of those being State Representative Dan Calkins, who not long ago sounded off on this and really was pretty upset with where we're at in this issue of the unemployment fraud that happened. Calkins said that this is a criminal act.
They ought to be sued. They ought to be sued for not honoring their contract. I mean, this is criminal.
And he's talking about the contract that Deloitte got to essentially operate the state's pandemic unemployment assistance program. And that was the program that the federal government implemented for the states to essentially make happen. A lot of blame going around, a lot of finger pointing going around, but regardless, somebody had to hit the button to say approved, approved, approved. Oh, that money went to a prison, approved. Oh, that money went to somebody who's dead, approved. $5 billion just in the state of Illinois. That's not considering the tens of billions and hundreds of billions and other fraud that there was from the COVID-19 pandemic assistance, funded entirely by your tax dollars, that was through PPP loans, unemployment, and a whole host of other things where there was a lot of fraud being reported now. About 17% of total fraud across the country. And you got to think Illinois getting in entirety, private sector, public sector, $160+ billion during COVID-19. Think about 17% of that. That's a lot of fraud that went out, your tax dollars that went out. So, again, State Representative Dan Calkins calling for there to be a criminal investigation and for charges to be leveled against the contractor who was given a no-bid contract. Again, here's State Representative Dan Calkins.
They ought to be sued. They ought to be sued for not honoring their contract. I mean, this is criminal.
We also discussed this a bit further.
I am shocked at the magnitude of the fraud and the overpayments, the total ineptitude of IDES.
So I was able to talk with Governor J.B. Pritzker, or rather I was able to ask him some questions yesterday. And this was one of the questions I had because it's been a while since I've been able to get a question into the governor. He's back down in Springfield with the state fair going on. He's got events all throughout the day today at the state fair, including for County Fair Day today. But he's also going to be cutting the ribbon. But yesterday he was at an unrelated news conference at the mental health facility here in Springfield. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I asked the governor, hey, some Republicans are saying there should be criminal investigations into the fraud, and in particular, the no-bid contractor, Deloitte, who ultimately had this no-bid contract. And here's what the governor had to say when I asked him whether or not there should be some kind of criminal investigation.
Some Republicans have said that there should be a criminal investigation of the contractor on the unemployment situation. Where do you stand on that, and how are we going to go about holding anybody accountable, either within the administration or with Deloitte, the contractor that got that new big contract?
So let's be clear. In an emergency, you act as quickly as you possibly can to help people that are in need. And that's what happened in March, April, May, June, July. In fact, all the way through about a year and a half until we started to get vaccines into, a majority of people's arms. So the idea that we're now going to go back into the, history books and pretend that there wasn't an emergency and then try to hold people accountable for decisions that had to be made on the fly and thinking about the best interests of the people of Illinois, getting money into their hands when they had lost their jobs, I think would be a travesty. Now, should we all be looking to make sure that we're operating as efficiently as possible? Yes. I want to point out, though, for people who are complaining that about the amount of money that was involved in UI fraud, that across the entire United States, hundreds of billions of dollars was lost. In Illinois, it was $3 billion in the federal program and $2 billion in the regular UI program. Nobody tried to do that, but I want to make clear, I don't know how many of you did, but I received a letter in the mail from Kentucky saying that I had applied for unemployment benefits in the state of Kentucky. Now, nothing was paid out, and of course, I made sure that they knew I was not actually applying. But that's just evidence of how widespread this problem really was. Obviously, the particular PUA program, which is the federal program, where Illinois didn't lose, but the entire federal government and everybody in the United States did lose.
Taxpayers.
Was poorly designed. It was adopted by every state because we were required to do it as they gave it to us. And they wanted the money out the door. I actually don't blame anybody in particular about this, because you remember that we were heading into another depression, not a recession, a depression in this country in those months. And so I think the federal government was doing everything that it could think of under President Trump and the Congress to get the money out the door. And we were obligated by law to get the money out the door. In the UI system, same, we wanted to make sure we were doing everything that we could. People were defrauding the governments all across the United States. We were not any, more hit by fraud than, frankly, anywhere else. In fact, California, just to give you an example, $20 billion of regular UI fraud. We had 2 here. New York, $8 billion. We had 2 here. Even on a population basis, we did better. That doesn't mean we're, we got it right. We didn't, and nobody did.
So the governor not really addressing the question of should there be some criminal liability for the contractor who got a no-bid contract. It was like a $14 million contract. I think that inflated from a $7 million contract, and they still are getting contracted. And it's cost now, according to an Auditor General report, more than $200 million just in that contract. So should there be some kind of criminal liability, and who's been held accountable within the Illinois Department of Employment Security for this? Because somebody had to have hit the button to say approved, approved, approved. So that's the question the governor answered. I asked him yesterday about unemployment fraud and whether there's going to be any actual criminal investigation.